May 22nd, 1967. F-4 pilots Lieutenant Colonel Robert Titus and Lieutenant Milan Zimmer are hot on the tail of a pair of MiG-21s. The aircraft are climbing at an incredible rate, 80 stories every second. Titus's twin engines pump out double the thrust of the enemy jet. He's closing fast. Though his F-4 is equipped with a gun, the weapon is not his first priority.
My focus is closing on this MiG, getting in position to fire a missile.
In the back seat of the F-4, Zimmer works the radar controls furiously, trying to get a radar lock for a Sparrow missile shot. In the front seat, Titus waits to get good tone for the heat-seeking Sidewinder.
Bob gets a good growl on the AIM-9 missile. It's, I mean, a real loud growl. Fires the missile.
As the Sidewinder slides off the rail, the MiG streaks into the clouds.
And the missile tracks right into the same hole that the MiG went into.
And it went right up his tailpipe, and he exploded. I didn't see the explosion, but as we went through the thin cirrus deck, there was debris and smoke and stuff in the air.
One MiG down, one to go. Titus applies right rudder to get the MiG in his crosshairs. He orders Zimmer to go bore sight, meaning lock the radar antenna in line with the gun sight. Titus fires a Sparrow missile. The MiG pilot reacts smartly.
Well, he saw us coming, and he turned hard left and started down.
And that's when the dogfight really began.
Titus rolls left and pitches down to give chase. The force of G shoves the Phantom pilots back in their seats. The F-4 screams into a power dive. The MiG pilot throws his aircraft all over the sky to shake his deadly shadow.
And it was some very high G maneuvers, right and left, up and down, at probably 550 to 600 miles an hour. I mean, we were smoking. It was one hell of a show.
The lower the MiG gets, the more it blends in with scattered reflections from the ground. Titus's missiles cannot lock onto the target. A skilled pilot flying the premier fighter of the Soviet bloc is no easy mark. The Soviet-built MiG-21 is a single-seat fighter capable of Mach 2, a worthy adversary to the F-4. The MiG-21 is lighter and more agile, but cannot outrun the more powerful Phantom. The MiG's intense maneuvering can defeat any of Titus's missiles. But this F-4 is packing a gun.
What was found in early Vietnam air combat was it would be nice to have the AIM-7, the AIM-9, and a cannon so that you covered all the elements of the potential air combat. Once it was discovered that a gun was needed, a bunch of activities took place. One was the design of a gun pod, the SU-16, which was centerline mounted like a fuel tank.
At the heart of the Su-16 was an M61A1 six-barreled 20mm rotary cannon, which operated like a Gatling gun. Power was provided to the cannon by a ram air turbine that popped out into the Phantom's slipstream. As the turbine rotated, an electric current was generated sufficient to spin the barrels. The cannon was capable of an astonishing rate of fire, over 6,000 rounds per minute. But the gun pod had several major drawbacks.
The problem was that the centerline fuel tank was taken off to make room for the gun pod, so the aircraft went out and had 600 gallons less fuel. In addition, it was not optimized, the gun pod, to the gun sight. So really it was kind of a spray and hope philosophy rather than an accurate system.
Regardless of its limitations, Phantom pilots now had a weapon to fall back on when their missiles failed. Now, Bob Titus flips the master arm switch for his M61A1 cannon. On the belly of his F4, the turbine spins in the slipstream. Titus's gun is primed and ready. His gun sight is worthless. He'll need a hunter's instinct to take the MiG down.
Every time I tried to get lead on him, he'd reverse, thereby spoiling my aim.
The closer Titus and Zimmer get to the ground, the more immediate the danger.
Flak was all around us. I mean, it was everywhere. We had gray flak, black flak, it was all over the place.
Two surface-to-air missiles streak up towards the F4.
I look out the canopy and here's this big telephone pole coming up. I instinctively ducked my head because the missile appeared to be close to me. I don't think Titus saw it. I'm not sure if he did or not.
I was too focused on the MiG to be concerned with that. My job was to get the MiG.
The MiG pilot is running out of options. Titus is closing in. The MiG rolls wings level and begins a high G pullout. Bob Titus yanks back on the stick, straining to pull his nose in front of the MiG. He must compensate for the increased deflection of an externally mounted gun.
I didn't know how much lead to put on him, so I just put the pipper at his 12 o'clock position, pulled the trigger, and ran a buzzsaw through him.
Bullets rip through the length of the MiG-21.
M61 Gatling gun fires 6,000 rounds per minute. So pull the trigger, it goes boom. That's about 50 rounds of 20mm high explosive incendiary and armor-piercing incendiary.
Titus pitches up to keep from overshooting.
Went high right and pulled G's and came back around on him again, put the pipper on him, tried to do it again, and the gun had jammed.
But the Americans have already done enough damage.
We're looking, and the MiG is floating like this. We got him, he's going in. The pilot didn't get out.
Robert Titus and Milan Zimmer have just killed 2 MiGs in a single air battle. The second victory, the gun kill, validates the recent argument that F-4s should carry a cannon, in addition to their air-to-air missiles. Over the next few months, F-4 Phantoms arriving in service in Vietnam have new, updated gun pods. The Su-23 gun pod was an improved follow-on to the Su-16. During combat testing of the Su-16, pilots found that at low speeds, the ram air turbine that powered the cannon failed to produce enough energy to spin the barrels. The new Su-23 featured a more reliable, self-powered cannon and a lead computing gun sight. Having a reliable gun meant that Phantom pilots could be more aggressive in engaging the enemy. January 12, 1973, the closing days of the Vietnam War. 2 Navy Phantoms catapult from Midway into an overcast sky. They're flying BARCAP, a barrier combat air patrol between the coast of North Vietnam and Midway. They'll intercept any MiGs that head out over the water towards American ships in the Gulf. Flying lead is Lieutenant Vic Kovaleski and his Rio, Jim Wise. Flying off his wing is Lieutenant Pat Arwood with his Rio, Ensign Lynn Oates. They arrive on station, and after a short time, the air controller breaks in over the radio. There's a bandit airborne, heading straight for Midway.
It was a real threat to the Midway, not only MiGs, but even surface craft to come out to challenge the carrier, because it would be quite a prize to sink or damage the Midway.
Now, she did have some point defense systems at the time, such as a surface-to-air missile defense battery. But just as in the Second World War, the primary defense for an aircraft carrier is her own embarked fighters.
The air controller vectors them in the direction of the enemy MiG.
As we were descending, Vic picked him up. It was about 11 o'clock position, and we were down in the 10,000-foot range. The MiG was maybe 12 miles or so.
The MiG is heading toward the Americans. At 2 miles, the North Vietnamese spots the big Phantoms and makes an about face.
The MiG appeared to be heading toward us, but he very quickly reversed course and started heading due north.
The communist pilot is in no mood to fight. Kovaleski pitches up and cuts back right to improve his angle off the MiG's tail. The powerful Phantom closes on its prey. The MiG breaks right to shake his pursuer. Kovaleski and Arwood must be cautious. Kovaleski closes to missile range. He gets good tone on his Sidewinder and fires.
Vic's first missile detonated by the tail. I'm sure that the MiG pilot knew that he was damaged, and it was probably more damage than we realized from a distance.
Kovaleski fires another Sidewinder.
When the second missile flew up the tailpipe and it exploded, the MiG pitched up violently into 90-degree vertical position and just virtually stopped and rolled off to the right-hand side and then plummeted into the water.
This will prove to be the last MiG kill of the Vietnam War. On January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords are signed, and American involvement in the Vietnam War comes to an end. Between 1965 and 1973, America claimed over 200 MiGs, 8 of which were downed by pilots of the USS Midway.
Midway had the benefit in providing the platform from which the very first and the very last confirmed MiG kills of the entire Vietnam War were scored.
Midway served throughout the Cold War, modernized again in 1986 and equipped with the new F-18 Hornet. She goes into combat for the last time in January 1991 as flagship of the Arabian Gulf Battle Force. During 43 days of combat, Midway flies 3,339 combat sorties, averaging 121 per day, delivering 2,000 tons of bombs and missiles on enemy targets. It is a stunning achievement and Midway's swan song.
In 1991, right after the successful conclusion of Operation Desert Storm, it was decided that the Midway would be retired a few years ahead of schedule. Age was catching up with her, and the fact that she just was too small to be operating the carrier aircraft that we had in the inventory.
After 47 years of service, Midway is decommissioned at Naval Air Station North Island, San Diego, April 11, 1992. As testament to her proud service in Vietnam and the Persian Gulf, she was spared the scrapyard.
It is now a museum in San Diego and is available for public viewing to look at a ship that basically was a milestone in carrier aviation history.
It is a fitting legacy for the men and women who served on Midway and the bold airmen who launched from her deck. Men who flew into hostile skies, faced determined and skilled opponents, and returned to Midway as MiG killers. July 8, 1972. Pilot Steve Ritchie leads a flight of 4 F-4 Phantoms, call sign Paula, on combat air patrol over North Vietnam. As part of Operation Linebacker, the war's biggest bombing campaign, their mission is to protect B-52s from MiGs. On this mission, the Americans are able to tap into the enemy's command and control network, an intelligence coup that's driving the success of Linebacker.
They could hear the controller that was talking to the pilot. They could hear what the pilot was saying. And so you knew where they were, what they're looking at, and where they're coming from.
Steve Ritchie and Paula Flight are heading towards Hanoi. Suddenly, combat control crackles in his helmet. MiGs are in the air, somewhere below. Ritchie drops down to search for the enemy. He can't find them. They could be anywhere. Then another warning comes over the radio.
I got a call indicating that they had us in sight and they were cleared to fire. And that information at best was about 40 to 60 seconds old. And we had no visual. So that gets your attention. We passed canopy to canopy about 1,000 feet from each other, doing about 600 miles an hour each, closing at about 1,200 miles an hour. Just subsonic. I could actually see the pilot in the cockpit.
Ritchie knows there's another MiG in the air. They've split up, setting a trap for him. The first MiG has streaked past Ritchie. If he turns to follow, the second MiG will be on his 6, but Ritchie doesn't bite. He drops altitude and waits for the second MiG to show his hand. And he does. Now Ritchie makes his move. He pulls into a hard left turn. 6.5 Gs plaster him into his seat. The two planes are now angling towards each other in what pilots refer to as the high crossing position. In order for his missile to get a lock, Ritchie needs to get behind the MiG. He rolls to the inside, causing the MiG to shoot past him. Ritchie's now on the MiG's tail. It's a brilliant move. Ritchie pulls hard right out of the roll and gets a radar lock. It then takes 4 seconds for the radar to feed the information to the missile.
1,001, 1,002, 1,003, 1,004, which is a long time. Squeeze the trigger, nothing happens. It's another 1.5 seconds until the missile comes off the rail.
Ritchie commits a second missile. Pilots often ripple-fired the Sparrow because of its failure rate.
First missile went through the center of the fuselage of the MiG. Second missile went through the fireball.
The explosion sends a wall of debris hurtling through the air. Ritchie's headed right for it. He rolls up to steer clear. It's too late. Debris punches into his left wing, gouging the skin. Ritchie clutches the stick. The big Phantom shrugs off the insult. Paula Flight rejoins and heads for home, Udorn, Thailand. When they arrive, the celebration begins.
I actually flew a couple of victory rolls over the field, which is kind of traditional. And we had a party at the club that night you would have enjoyed.
Steve Ritchie is on the cusp of greatness. He has tied renowned veteran pilot Robin Olds with 4 MiGs to his credit. Ritchie needs just one more kill to join the coveted ranks of American fighter aces. But the quest could cost him his life. August 28, 1972. Steve Ritchie leads a flight of 4 F-4 Phantoms, call sign Buick. Their combat air patrol mission is winding down when he gets word of MiGs in the air. As flight lead, Ritchie's Phantom is equipped with a little black box that makes a big difference in air-to-air combat against MiGs. The APX-81, officially known as the Combat Tree, or just Tree to airmen. Tree is an IFF, Identification Friend or Foe transponder system. All military aircraft carry transponders that send and receive identification information to air traffic control and friendly planes. But Tree is unique. It can read the enemy's transponder. Tree-equipped Phantoms can tell if a blip on their radar is a MiG and shoot them out of the sky from miles away. Ritchie has used technology to get in position. But he must get a visual before he can fire.
Under those circumstances, the cardinal rule is to never fire if there's any chance there could be a friendly in the forward firing sector.
The aircraft hurtle in, their closing speed a blistering 1,500 miles per hour. Ritchie fires 2 missiles, but at these staggering closing speeds, the missile can't maintain radar lock. They streak away harmlessly. The MiGs take no evasive action. They're focused on reaching the sanctuary of Hanoi's anti-aircraft defenses. Ritchie must make his kill soon. The MiGs roar head-on past the climbing F-4s. Ritchie orders a left brake. They swing around 180 degrees and zero in on the MiG's tail.
I'm now supersonic, doing about 1.2 Mach. They're still subsonic. And I got a radar lock on, fired 2 missiles. The first one appeared to go by on the right side of the MiG, and he broke left, which solved the problem for the 4th missile.
The MiG's abrupt maneuver slows him down. He drifts into the Sparrow missile's effective range. The missile's warhead detonates on impact. Steve Ritchie becomes the first Air Force pilot ace of the Vietnam War.
The number 2 MiG, in that flight of 2, did a wave down to the ground, and I elected not to try to go after that MiG due to fuel. And, you know, I've debated that in my mind many, many times over the years, whether or not we should have tried that.
Ritchie and Buick flight head south for friendly airspace as word reaches the airbase at Udorn, Thailand. The Air Force now has an ace.
We came in and actually did a little air show over the field.
In this rarely seen interview, Steve Ritchie recounts the mission.
Picked them up high at 11 o'clock on almost a head-on pass, and from there maneuvered into 6 o'clock and fired a few missiles and was lucky enough to get a kill.
Operation Linebacker thunders on. The Paris peace talks resume in late August. The devastating air assault has taken a heavy toll on North Vietnamese transportation, oil supplies, and power generation.
The North Vietnamese simply did not think we had the will, or our president had the will, to bring the force of our TAC air down upon them. Miscalculated.
On October 22nd, North Vietnamese concessions in Paris lead to a cessation of bombing strikes over the 20th parallel, but the talks break down again 2 months later. On December 14th, President Nixon sends Hanoi an ultimatum: come back to the negotiating table within 72 hours, or the bombing resumes. There's no response from Hanoi. On December 18th, Operation Linebacker 2 commences, and B-52s head north. 200 B-52s, half the Strategic Air Command, are committed to the fight. By December 29th, the big bombers have flown 729 sorties and dropped over 15,000 tons of bombs. The North Vietnamese return to the negotiations, and on January 23, 1973, a peace agreement is signed.